And we are back, we are back, we are back. And I must say that I'm very honored to meet you. I'm very happy to meet you. We were talking a little earlier, and we crossed paths a couple of times, but this is my first time actually being able to meet you face to face. So I'm glad that you're here. Thank you for being a part of the Black National Black Book Festival. Can we start a little bit with when you became an author, why you wanted to be an author, and then what made you continue? Because you have longevity in this industry, which is not something that a lot of people can claim.
Well, it is a pleasure to finally meet you in person, Rhonda, and I want to thank my cousin Pamela Jarman Wade for making the invitation for me to be here. I want to thank you all for being here. So many beautiful faces, people I know from way back, people I know and don't remember exactly. I feel like it's home, like this is a family reunion, and you seeing like cousins you ain't seen forever. It's like, oh, I remember him. I remember her. I don't know their name. But writing for me is something that I didn't ask to do or set out to do. I like to think that this was a calling for me to engage in making words dance on the page. I believe that words can change the world. I spend every day in my life trying to change the world one word at a time. This is my mission. Here's where it came from. Recently, I was talking to my father, who's 82 years old. And I asked him, how does he think I got to this point in my writerly career? And he said very frankly and very honestly, Kwame, your mother and I, you were an experiment. That was the word he used. We wanted to figure out how can we create a human being who knows the power of words and who knows how to use those words to not only transform his life, but to transform the lives of others. This is the house I grew up in, y'all. So when I was 3 years old, it's a long answer to your question, Rhonda, but I'm gonna give you the background. When I was 3 years old, I lived on the Upper West Side of New York City. My parents were from a place called Chesapeake, Virginia, and Norfolk County, Virginia. But they had gone to Columbia University for graduate school. My mother and father both graduated from Norfolk State University. My mother got a scholarship offer to go to Teachers College, Columbia, full ride, everything. My father was a senior at Norfolk State, so he had one more year. My mother was like, nah, I'm not going. I want to stay with my boo. I ain't leaving you. My father said, if you don't accept the scholarship, we are over. So she went to Teachers College, Columbia University. He came the next year after he graduated. 2 years later, I was born. So I was born to these two academics who were studying early childhood education with a particular interest on literature and the role of literacy in the classroom, in the lives of children. So you can imagine what my household, what my life was like. Books were reward and punishment. So at age 3, my favorite book was a book by a poet y'all may have heard of named Dr. Seuss. I would run around the house as a 3-year-old screaming, fox, socks, knocks, box. Fox and socks, socks and box. I love this poem. I knew it verbatim. So the school I went to at 3 years old, it was a child development center. It was called Riverside Preschool Child Development Center. Riverside was inside of a church that was built by John D. Rockefeller. So this is the school I'm going to. At the end of school one day, my mother's coming to pick me up like she does every day. And I decide I'm gonna build a house out of wooden blocks to show my mother how awesome I am. And she's gonna be really proud of me. So I build this house out of wooden blocks. Before she arrives, One of my friends, another 3-year-old, he kicks over the house. So now I'm mad. And I go up to him with the only weapons I have, my words. And so I say to him, those were my blocks that you flipped. Lest you want a quick payback, better fix my quick block stack. At which point he began to cry. Now, when my mother comes to school, the teachers at Riverside say, Mrs. Alexander, we have a problem. Your son Kwame is arrogant. He intimidates all the kids with his words. To which my mother said, thank you. We teach him to use his words. I didn't have a choice in this career, in this life, in this job, in this passion of mine. It was an experiment.
Now, with that being said, this being an experiment, literacy has been a part of your life since being a young child. So when you finally decided to be an author, what types of books did you want to write?
So when I finally decided to be an author in 1991, my father, who owned a publishing company, naturally I went to him and said, will you publish my poems? Because that's what I was writing. I was writing love poems, y'all. Like really bad love poems. Kim remember. Lips like yours ought to be worshipped. See, I ain't never been too religious, but you can baptize me anytime. I asked my father to publish my poem. My father said no. Poetry doesn't sell. So then me being this person, this kid who was confident and arrogant and believed in himself, I started my own publishing company and started publishing my own love poems. Well, my first book of love poems came out in 1994. I will not tell you the name of it because I don't want y'all to Google it. I had read an article on a novelist by the name of Stephen King. It was an article in a magazine called Publishers Weekly. Turns out he had a novel come out called Cujo. And he put himself on a 30-city tour on a motorcycle. He rode around to every city on a motorcycle. So I said to myself, I'm going on tour. I ain't had no motorcycle and I ain't had no money, but I'm going on tour. So I traveled around to different cities in my best friend's used blue minivan. He was an artist. He sold his artwork. I sold my book. I ended up in a place called Los Angeles, California, at a church called Maranatha Community Church. The pastor agreed to let me sell books in the gift shop at the end of the service. I had 160 books with me. I'm sitting in the congregation, in the pews, and the sermon is finished. The benediction is over. The doors of the church are about to be open, but the pastor says, we have a poet here, y'all, who will be signing books in the gift shop. Kwame Alexander, would you please come up to the pulpit? I'm like, oh, this is interesting. So I go up to the pulpit, and she says, would you like to share a poem with the congregation? Now, mind you, there are 400 or 500 beautiful black women in church hats. And I told y'all what kind of poems I write. Okay, but I also want to sell these 160 books. So I stand up in the pulpit and I say, I have never been a slave, yet I know I am whipped. I have never been to Canada, yet I hope to cross your border. I have never traveled underground, yet the night knows my journey. If I were a poet in love, I'd say that with you I have found that new place where romance is just a beginning and freedom is our end. And it was complete silence until a woman in the back of the church said, hallelujah! I sold all 160 books. This was the moment where I said to myself, and I knew, you're gonna be a poet. This is going to be your job. It may not be today, it may not be next week, You don't know when it's going to be, but you're going to keep doing it, and eventually it's going to happen.
Well, you eventually went from writing poems to writing full books, right?
I went to writing full books of poems.
Well, what types of books do you read when you're not writing? What types of stories do you like to read? What type of literature do you like to read?
I read cookbooks. I read novels. I read books about doors. Yeah. Daphne Maxwell reads book about doors. Y'all, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I read mysteries. I read memoirs. I read everything.
But what keeps your attention?
What keeps my attention? Good writing, great storytelling, amazing, like compelling characters. Yeah. Lately, I've been listening to a lot of audiobooks. Is that reading?
I think it is. It's
People in the back are like, yeah, this lady in the front like, no. Y'all gonna have to talk. Y'all gonna have to have a conversation. I love listening to audiobooks. You do?
I listen to audiobooks when I'm driving. I listen to audiobooks when I'm exercising. Sometimes if I just need to get my mind off of a long work day while I'm working, I'll listen to an audiobook because it helps me out. I do believe that it's a form of reading because you're still taking in that knowledge. You're still experiencing that story. It just may not be physically reading the book with your eyes. I don't know how you feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's valuable and meaningful. And originally, the first form of sort of communication was oral. So there's a significant and a meaningful value to that. It's different than being able to read words on the page. And it's a different experience. One is not necessarily better than the other. It's different, is my opinion.
Absolutely agree. And while we're talking about books and you do have your hand on that book, let's talk about it. Why Fathers Cry at Night? What's this book about?
You about to say something smart. You about to say something smart.
So, I've written 39 books. This is the 39th. There are people in this audience who knew me in the first 2 or 3 books. It's been a long, beautiful journey. This was the hardest book I've ever written. It's a memoir about love. It's about how I've loved, how I've learned to love, how I've failed at love, how I want to get better at love. Familial love, sibling love, parental love. Being a parent is the hardest thing ever, y'all. And romantic love. I wrote this book as sort of a way to talk to my kids about how their father has loved. My 15-year-old saw it on the kitchen counter, and she said, "Dad, you wrote a memoir." I was like, "Yeah." She said, "We're studying memoir in class." She's like, "How cool would it be if I read your memoir?" She said, "It's not gonna happen, but how cool would it be?" Ultimately, here's why I wrote the book. My mother passed away on September the 1st, 2017. You know, when someone you love passes away, they say that they come back and say, and you get to speak to them, or they show you signs, or they send you messages, right? I wasn't getting those messages. I was like, "Mom, where are you? How come you ain't talking to me?" And so I remember talking to Steph, my daughter's mom, and I said, "Steph," because she and my mom were really close. And I said, "Steph, do you ever talk to my mom?" And like without missing a beat, she was like, "All the time." I talked to her, Aunt Cora, Aunt Lila Mae, they all talked together to me. And so my response was, first of all, I was just wild and envious. And then my next response was, do you ever talk to Uncle Richard and Uncle Philip? And I started naming all the dudes. She was like, I didn't talk to them when they were alive. She said, Uncle Philip would come by and rub me on the head or the shoulder. Oh, good girl. And then keep it moving. I don't want to be the guy who's not remembered. I don't want to be the man who my descendants can say, oh, he just came around and touched me on the shoulder, or we have no emotional connection. I'm on this journey to try to figure out how not to be that man. So, I'm in Target. My daughter and I love to go to Target together. It's the one thing that my teenager will actually do with me, where I get her full attention. And I realize now why she wants me to go and not her mother, because her mother won't let her get the crop tops. And I'm like, yeah, that's good, get it. Anyway, I take what I can get, y'all, don't judge me. So we're in Target. My nephew, my sister is visiting, so my 9-year-old nephew is with me, Jordan. So while my daughter Samaya is trying on clothes, Jordan and I are in the aisles and we're dancing. Because in my mind, I'm like, I'm not gonna be that uncle who nobody remembers. So we dancing and we connected and we bonded and we having a good time. So fast forward, a week later, my sister texts me. She's back at home in Staten Island, and she texts me and she says, Kwame, Jordan just came up to me and he said, I can't wait to grow up and be an uncle like Uncle Kwame. That's why I wrote the book, y'all, so I can become that guy. And the first step to me sort of making a change, becoming a better person, for me, was writing about it. That was the door opener. And now I just gotta walk through it.
Beautiful. Now, tell me about your process of writing your memoir. I mean, was it kind of hard, because you know exactly what you wanted to accomplish with this book, but when you're actually going through the process of writing it and you're reliving certain instances, was it therapeutic in certain ways for you, or did you see yourself maybe looking at some things that you wish you could have done differently?
So when I started writing the book, y'all know I write love poems. So it was a lot of love poems. I was writing a memoir with love poems. The thing about writing poems, y'all, is you may think you're being vulnerable and open, but poetry is metaphor and simile and figurative language. And for so long, when I write poetry, I have the luxury to hide behind the metaphor. You ain't really knowing how I'm feeling or thinking, because I got, So when I wrote this book, the memoir, I started, after I wrote the love poems, which were really easy, I wrote some prose pieces to give more context to the poems. That was hard. I wrote letters to my father, to my daughters, to myself. I included recipes. I really began to delve deep into my life, into the context of the poems I had written. And that was the most challenging thing. I never read the book in its entirety, from front to end. So everything was always still separate and disparate. In this past February, I got the advanced reading copies in the mail. And I read the book from front to back for the first time since I began writing it. And I immediately began to have panic attacks because I realized what I had done. I had painted this very vulnerable self-portrait of myself, which I ain't never done in my life. And the thing about painting a self-portrait is that there are always other people in the painting. And so some of these people were no longer living, but a lot of them are still here. So when I realized what I had done, I started having panic attacks, and I called my editor and I said, we can't publish this book. And after she told me the books were in the warehouse, she proceeded to try to talk me off the ledge. And the book came out. My brother didn't read it. My oldest sister didn't read it, wouldn't read it. My little sister read it and said, I love everything about it, and I hate the way you wrote about our mother. My two daughters, suffice it to say, my 15-year-old will probably never read this book until she gets to an age where she has some questions like I did for my dad. My oldest daughter, she called me and she said, or she didn't call me, she texted me. We hadn't talked in a very long time. She texted me and she said, please stop talking about me in public. My father called me and said, I read your little memoir. And then he proceeded to laugh and say, tell your editor I'm suing you for defamation of character and slander. Oh, and by the way, how's your day going? The hardest thing I've ever done. Now, I am so glad that I wrote it, because every relationship in my life is significantly more authentic and real than it has ever been. This is the best thing I could have done for myself.
You answered my question. I think you were reading my mind, because I was just going to ask you, you got that feedback. Did you regret moving forward with the book? But you answered that question beautifully. So I think that when anybody writes their memoirs, like you said, when you're looking into a picture, you're not the only one in the picture. So there are going to be times where you have to talk about other people, even though you're talking about yourself. How do you balance how much you want to talk about other people versus just talking about yourself? Because you don't, as much as you want to, you don't live life by yourself.
How do you balance it? The thing is, you're painting a self-portrait of you're not painting a portrait of other people. They're in the painting, but it's not their story. So I just tried to be respectful and kind and tried to write about the things that I was dealing with, not the things other people may have done to me. This was not gonna be that kind of book. It was an interesting sort of tightrope to walk, y'all. It was an interesting tightrope.
I know fatherhood means a lot to you. You even have the podcast that's dedicated to fatherhood as well. Can you talk a bit about the podcast, and have you talked about the book on the podcast?
Yeah, so, I mean, being a father is, I gotta share this with y'all. So on my website, I have a contact us form. And schools and festivals and libraries and people can contact me and ask me to come to their school or their library or their book festival. And so for most of my childhood and my adult life, I have complained about the fact that my father used to travel a lot, speaking and preaching. And I vowed I would never do that. Before COVID, I think I was on the road 200 days a year. So my daughter, who's 15 years old, went on my website and filled out the form. Name, Samaya Alexander. She put her email, she put her phone number. School, she put my house. Title, she put the best daughter. She put her city, state, her grade. Proposed event. All of them. Is there a message? Come home forever. I love you. In many ways, I have learned to extend a lot of grace to my father, who I complained about a lot. And a big part of that is because I hope this child extends me some grace one day. Because, man, I apparently have become him in a lot of ways. I don't even remember the question.
I was talking about the podcast.
Yeah, there's a podcast based on this book. It's called Why Fathers Cry. And I interviewed fathers, sons, husbands, lovers, men, about all these things that we're talking about today. And we did 6 episodes, it's a limited series. And the last episode airs tomorrow. And it's with my father.
That's going to be powerful. How can we listen to the podcast?
Get the podcast wherever you get your podcast. On Spotify and Apple Music and Amazon Music.
Thank you, Kwame. So I know we only have a few minutes left. Does anybody in the audience, and we can't open the questions up for long because Kwame unfortunately has a catch up, right? So is there anybody who would like to ask a question? We could take maybe 1 or 2 questions. Yes.
Thank you so much for your vulnerability. It was hard to hear some, so maybe you already talked about the imprint Versify, and how is that going? Are you accepting submissions?
So I started a publishing company in 2017. It was called Versify. And we published about 47 books. In 2021, it was sold to HarperCollins. I decided not to go forward with that for a number of business-related reasons, but Versify is still happening. It's still flourishing. I'm just no longer affiliated with it. So that answers a part of your question, I guess. But they are accepting submissions, absolutely. I am planning on starting a new publishing company next year.
Okay, you're starting a new publishing company. What types of authors are you going to be publishing? Have you decided?
I'm going to publish authors who write well, who tell great stories, and who have compelling stories and characters, and who are interesting.
And if you remember, in the beginning of the interview, I asked him what captures his attention, and that was his exact answer. Well, Kwame, thank you very much. Hold on.
We got time.
We got another question? Okay.
Yeah, okay, we got you. Cross over.
So in 2008, I started writing a book at a cafe in Greenbrier, on Greenbrier Parkway in Chesapeake, Virginia. It's a book about 2 boys who play basketball. And I finished it in 2009, and I submitted it to several publishers, and it got rejected. over the next 5 years, I spent a lot of time in that cafe because it also meant I got to spend time with my parents who lived down there. And I spent a lot of time in Panera Bread. It became sort of my writing studio. I also got about 22 rejections for the book over that course of 5 years. Between 2008 and 2013, nobody wanted to publish the book. And eventually, I had gone through 2 agents, and I had found another agent who was a really high-powered agent. Agents are the people who are sort of the liaisons between the writer and the publisher. So I found this really powerful agent. He agreed to represent me. He said he was going to sell The Crossover, which was the name of the novel. And for a year and a half, it was no go. He kept emailing me saying nobody wanted to publish the book. But I didn't get any feedback on why. So I finally scheduled a meeting with him. And I went up to New York City and I sat across from him and I said, Alex, what's up? Why aren't people liking this book? I think it's really good. And he said, oh, you mean the poetry book? Because The Crossover is a novel told in poems. It's a novel told in poems. 238 pages, 5 years of my life. Best book I could ever write. Best book I had written, book number 15. He says, oh, the poetry book? I said, yeah. He said, oh, Kwame, I never sent the book out. I said, what do you mean? He said, I never sent it to any publisher. But why, Alex? Well, Kwame, it's a poetry book. You don't want your career to be defined by poetry? You're better than that. Remember 3-year-old Kwame? This was an experiment. How do you use words to feel empowered, to be powerful, to know your worth? And so I looked at him and the most powerful agency in America, and I said, you're fired. You cannot have other people who believe less in your potential and your ambition and hope than you do. They gotta believe as much, if not more. And so I fired him. I got another agent, and within 6 months, we had sold the book. And the book got published. It ended up winning this really big award called the Newbery Medal. In 2015, it changed my life. And one of the publishers who had initially rejected the book called my agent and said, bring Kwame to New York, we want to meet with him. You win a prestigious award like the Newbery Medal, all of a sudden, everybody wants to sort of be in business with you. So I'm going to New York to meet with, I'm not going to tell you all the name of the company because we're not about rumors and gossip. It was Scholastic. So Dick Robinson, founder, may he rest in peace, he said, Kwame, we want to meet with you. So I'm going to New York City. My dad says, act like you belong to be in the room, Kwame. So I go to Macy's. Y'all got Macy's here? Or Macy's? I couldn't afford Neiman or Nordstrom there. So I went to Macy's and I got the cheapest, best suit I could. It was a navy blue suit. I've been laid off from my job. I didn't have a whole lot. So got the suit, get into the meeting, and what's reverberating in my head is after I won the Newbery Medal, I got a call from 3 people. Number 1, Lois Lowry. Y'all ever heard of The Giver? Okay. Newbery Medal. Catherine Patterson. Y'all ever heard of The Bridge of Terabithia? Newbery Medal. And Linda Sue Park. a Newbery medalist. All three of them called me and they said three things. Kwame, you won the Newbery medal, we won the Newbery medal, so don't forget these things. One, hire an assistant. You're gonna be too busy to do anything on your own now. Two, do not commit to writing any book for the next year because you're gonna be too busy. Number three, your next book contract should be, and they each gave me the same number. For the sake of this conversation, let's say the number is $1,000. Y'all know it wasn't $1,000, but for the sake of the conversation. And I said, whoa, really? Yes. So I'm in the meeting with Dick Robinson, and these are the things that are reverberating. He says, Kwame, we want to give you whatever you want. The world is your oyster. Write whatever you want, we're gonna publish it. I said, great. He slides over a little sheet of paper, presumably with an amount of money on it. He gives it to my agent. My agent says, all right, Kwame and I are gonna step out of the room. We step out of the room. Kwame, they're going to offer you $30. Y'all remember what the amount was? What was it? Kwame, they're gonna offer you $30. Now the thing I should have said was the deal I got for the crossover was $5. So $30 is a lot, it's 6 times more than I got for the first book. So I'm like, cool, that's great. He said, Kwame, I think we ought to take it. And I say, nah, we can't take that. You gotta go back in there. She goes back in there, she comes back out. Kwame, I got it's $60, which is 10 times, 12 times more than I got for the first book. Conventional wisdom says, be happy. So I say, you need to go back in there and ask them for $1,000. And she looks at me and laughs. And she says, Kwame, you won the Newbery, but don't let your head get too big. This is my agent who's supposed to represent me, who's supposed to think as much, if not more than me. And I look at her and I say, you're fired. This is my 4th agent. And I say, you're fired. And 6 months later, I get the $1,000. Look, what I believe, y'all, like Amy Tan said in the Joy Luck Club, you gotta know your worth. Human nature is designed for people to try to get out of you as little as you will allow them. But you've got to be your own champion. And it's not about being arrogant. It's about being confident in who you are and believing in yourself. I am the greatest, not because I am better than anyone, but because no one is better than me. Y'all have been great. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Okay, so Kwame is going to be up at the front. He will be signing his book for anybody who would like a copy. And then don't forget, we have another interview happening at 2 o'clock. So come right back here. Thank you.